And I haven't seen. Well, I saw one, the New York, but I remember. I think it was almost the last night of the convention in New York or in Detroit, and going up on the top steps of the the stairway, just having a little encounter with someone there, and suggesting that place, knowing that people don't use hotel stairways that much, and that would probably be a safe place to do it because neither of us could use the rooms we were using. And then also in New York, which yours truly happened to capture on film and broadcast all over, was an encounter with someone that I met that was just kind of enamored by. And then when I went out to the New York, I think that was in 86.
Right.
And then back in 94, when we went out for the Stonewall anniversary, came running up to us in the parade and said, "Hi, this is so-and-so, remember me?" And and that was kind of neat to know.
Richard Jones.
Yeah, Richard Jones, that he was still alive and doing well. So those are two sexual encounters that I remembered. But I always remembered just the camaraderie and just the people coming together and just being able to see old friends and establishing new friendships.
You remember in New York, they facilitated us also meeting Mr. Ruskin?
Mm.
I mean, these are things that, for me are all
and I
important.
have pictures of that, and I always felt honored because after later on, I don't think I was aware of who Bayard Rustin was at that time, but I think it was in 87 or 88, a book came out, it was called Bearing the Cross, and Bayard Rustin, the prominence that he played in the Civil Rights Movement with Dr. King, and then to know that I had taken a picture with him, and with some other people, Russ Webb was in that picture, I think you were in there, and I've always, whenever people come over, I always show that, and I always tell people that this was a person that I had met, and he was a good, close confidant of Dr. Martin Luther King, but just to know of all the work that he did and how he was kind of vilified at some point because he stuck to his guns on some issues, and I think was ahead of his time on some of those issues, and I think people in the African American community and probably the gay community thought he was selling out or compromising his values, and he was really looking farther ahead, trying to bring communities together more than keeping them apart.
What I recall from that meeting was finding out, which I never knew before, that he was a primary motivator, organizer for the March on Washington in '63, yeah. And was actually forced out of the leadership because he was an out gay man.
And actually he had been out from 60 to 63. The story, historically, Dr. King was going to do some demonstrations at the Democratic Convention in 60, and Adam Clayton Powell, who was like the big kingpin in New York at that time, didn't want him to do it, and let Martin know, saying that if you go ahead with these conventions, I'm going to let the word out that you and Bayard Rustin are lovers. And Bayard Rustin says, well, Martin Luther King's a man of integrity. He's not going to back down. He's going to stick to his guns. And King literally buckled. And Rustin was kind of hurt by that, but understood that the movement needed to go ahead regardless of his personality differences. And so they didn't speak for probably 2 or 3 years. But then when the march came on, that kind of solidified their friendship again. But it was a hurtful time for Bayard Rustin. Mm-hmm. But to know that there was gay homosexual politics way back in the 60s and that affected the civil rights movement that you never read about. In fact, I didn't even know who Bayard Rustin was until I got involved with Black and White Men Together, and then through that book. And it's a shame that because he was black and gay, he was kind of kept to the sidelines. So I still have a folder on him when he died. I kept the clippings out of the New York Times and the obituary that they had on him and everything. So.
How has being a member of either your local organization or the national organization affected or changed your life?
Actually, years ago when I was getting involved with, when I found myself being attracted to black men, when I remember going to the Milwaukee bar, the Factory, back in the late 70s, and seeing all these black guys dancing, and to me, and literally, and it sounds stupid and it sounds racist, but literally they all look similar. But then there were 2 guys that I noticed that looked different, and they were kind of attractive to me. And I used to live like kind of a straight shot down the freeway, about 2 to 3 miles to the freeway from my house. And on the way down, back and forth to the bars or something periodically, I would just all of a sudden start noticing, oh, this guy looks interesting, this facial features look interesting, And I started finding myself attracted to black guys. And I didn't want it just to become a sexual thing, because at that time I had a lot of racist feelings and bigoted attitudes. And I said, well, wait, if I'm going to be having sex with people, black guys, I can't sit there and have sex with them at one point and then despise them or have issues with them. On the other hand, I have to kind of learn how to deal with this and deal with these issues that I'm facing. And so that organization really helped me look at some of the racism within myself, the attitudes and the bigotry that I had, the discrimination, and to sit there and not just to completely objectify people I was having sex with, to basically understand what understand their issues in life and concerns, and to make that a part of mine. And so that kind of got me into the. So Black and White Men Together was really kind of a crucial point in my life there, where that organization was able to help me do that.
We sort of touched on it a little bit, but how have you seen AIDS affect the organization?
I think in how it's decimated it. I mean, it's just a shame. I mean, granted, other people have died from other reasons, but a vast majority of people that have died have been from HIV and AIDS. And when you get to know people on a national level from around the country, and then to get to see that happen, it's you just wish you knew more back then, that we could have maybe stopped and kept people longer with us. I mean, my very dear friend Alan Hess, dying too early in his career, and other people like I mentioned, Redver Jean-Marie, John Teemer, Michael Fu, Reggie Williams, and countless other people.
What do you feel has been this organization's greatest accomplishment?
I think just starting out, I think just being there. It came out in a time where there was a lot of racism in the community, and I think it made a bold statement. I mean, black and white men together. I mean, you just look at all those words, black, white, men together. I mean, it was a bold statement for the early 80s to have. And I always kind of criticized the organization because I always thought it should have been more political. Even I think our chapter itself has always been more in the social bent, and I always tried to steer it into political. But you have to kind of realize that you have to look at where you live and kind of put the apples with the oranges and say, well, if you're not going to get it completely political, at least have social events and then work the political into them, which is what I thought we tried to do with some of our meetings. So just kind of standing out there in the forefront and taking stands. I know when this was Black and White Men Together in Milwaukee, we did do some bar testing at times where we'd go in as couples, different couples, and then even talked to some bars and told them we thought some of their practices were discriminatory, and even did testing where we have a white couple go in and a black and white couple and two blacks. I don't know if you were involved in that. I don't know if that was mid-'80s or early 80s. But actually, not just saying, well, we don't like, and then also letting people know which bars didn't cater to people. And usually they were the dancing bars that discriminated. And so when we go out after meetings, we would go to a different bar. And some of us would kind of grit our teeth because we wanted to go dancing, but we thought, well, no, if we're really about what we say we're about, we can't say one thing at a meeting and then go patronize an establishment that discriminates, later on. So.
What did you like best about our organization? And I say our organization.
In Milwaukee?
Both your local chapter and the national. Now, I know that you haven't been a member for the last number of years.
Yeah, actually it'd be 6 years.
Okay. But I don't know if you still have an affinity for the organization. But
actually, I like just the different people that I got to meet over time. The friendships that I was able to establish. And I mentioned that before, so that's what I like best about the organization, just kind of being there as an interracial organization.
And what did you like?
For some reason, it never got nationally out there, like the National Black Gay Leadership Forum or some of those other national organizations. And what I liked least about it is that maybe we needed to become more political. I know with the Millennium March that we did get some PR in standing up and taking a stand against the march, or the national did, and then the other chapters could play into what they wanted to. But I always thought that NABWMT and even BWMT Milwaukee could have been probably more political, because we could have really made a statement, and I think people would at that time would have probably looked into it. But then looking at what people have to deal with in their life, you don't want to be a gay person, a black gay person, try to get into a relationship or maintain a social support network, and then have to say, well, life's a struggle enough on my own as a gay or as a black man or as even a gay white man, and then I still have to do some fighting and advocating when I'm belonging to this organization. So looking at it from that perspective, you can see that you don't join something to put more burden on yourself and more hardships which could happen. I mean, if you're kind of a political advocate. So, but then taking into consideration, I think maybe to work in more social and supportive ideas and networks. I think another great thing about the organization is that it brought great members out, like Phil Wilson, who started out doing a lot of AIDS work and actually started some of the first safe sex workshops, and getting AIDS organizations around the country and institutions to kind of look at AIDS as a black issue, not just as a white gay man's issue, but also as a minority issue.
You mentioned Phil Wilson. He started out in BWMT in L.A., and then I know he went to the Black Leadership Conference, and he has met with a number of presidents, so he's influential, and he's doing very well, and he's a good spokesman, and he got his political roots through BWMT.
Yeah, basically Black White Men Together. And basically, I mean, he had a lover. I mean, and AIDS was a very important issue to him because his lover died.
Brownlee.
Yeah, Chris Brownlee. And actually, I saw him last September, October. He was here as a speaker for a conference they had him brought in for the New Concepts Black Leadership Conference that they had, or Black Conference with Churches. And he kind of gave the, I guess, the NIA plan, which is sort of a African American national plan to combat AIDS. And he was a speaker. So getting to see him over the years again, and seeing him on, in the news or reading about him in the Blade every now and then, it's kind of neat to know that you know someone on that level.
How have you seen race relations change since being a member of the BWMT?
Well, within the organization, I know there was always criticism because a lot of times the older white men, it was always kind of the older white men but paired up with the younger black men. Not across the board, but pretty much generally. You had instances where there were younger couples, but and you rarely ever saw the older black man with the younger person. Now, you can't sit there and say, well, this is the way it has to be, this is who you have to go with in your relationship. I mean, we can't help but fall in love or get into relationships with people. We can't plan that. I mean, that these things happen. But I think maybe to have, but I think race relations changed. At least I know they did for me, because I was able to. There was a lot of issues that I was able to grapple and deal with. The caucuses, the multicultural workshops that we had, and to some of the issues that we were forced to confront, and even sometimes we thought jammed down by our throats, which is a lot of times we always believed, which is what New York was trying to do in those days, was jam the racism or the issues down our throats too much. When it's like, okay, And my reaction was, hey, we're all friends in this together, don't make us look like the enemy. But I know that New York had more intensified issues that they had to deal with at that time, and so they wanted to make sure that I think everybody realized that, and were more forceful in some of their approaches. But I think coming to grips with racism within our gay community, and that's why I can still see right now in Milwaukee. I mean, it represents any other city, and Milwaukee is one of the most segregated cities in the country. And that's where I can see BWMT, thanks to you kind of starting it up again in the last 2-3 years, is trying to make it really a political organization or an advocate organization to really combat the racism that we see within the city.
Well, one of the things that we've sort of adopted as BWMT Milwaukee now is being gay and being interracial is not an issue to us. Because for a lot of people it is. Mm-hmm. But we try to provide a safe space for people that are gay and interracially involved. And that's more our thing. Right now we're more social activities, and I know we've talked to you about coming back and you want more political. But
oh no, I mean I would probably, in fact I should come back. I just forget when it's that third Saturday. But it's interesting because the way you said that, you said it's not really an issue for most of us, but we have it as a social supportive network. So if it wasn't an issue, you wouldn't need a social supportive network. So in a sense, it is an issue. And I mean, I'm not knocking you for it, but I'm just kind of glad that it came out of your mouth, because I think still in society people look. I mean, you see a black and a white man together, and people look. I mean, I hang out with a lot of young kids and mentor a lot of kids, and when they see me as a white man with young black kids, they look. The black kids themselves will tell their friends that, I'm a probation officer or something, jokingly, because I'm white. And so, like, why would a white man be with a black kid? Because he's a PO or the kid's in trouble. Mm-hmm. So I think some of those issues you have to deal with, and that's why I think it's fine for Black and White Men Together Milwaukee, and just BWMT Milwaukee.
Yes.
To to be a social supportive network, but it's got to be more. I mean, that helps us, and it's good for us. But what can we do for other people that aren't as fortunate to have that supportive network? And I think we have to take that a little extra step to make the city and the gay community, a better place for Milwaukee members.
Being a white or Caucasian man, how has that perspective affected your experience in the BWMT organization?
I kind of saw that question. I was kind of looking down to that when I was answering another one, and I don't know. It's kind of. I think there were times where we were made to feel guilty because we were white, and then there were other times that for what our ancestors basically did. And there were other times that we were made to feel that we weren't doing enough, or were still contributing to things that were going on in the country, and I remember the big debate, and I think this was in Milwaukee, on how racism was defined. And I always remember this coming from, I think, from Dr. Bush or from one of the conventions. Was that being white, you always had that white privilege, and you still see it. If you go somewhere, you'll always see the person give me the check if I'm with a black person. If you're going out to eat or something. And the other issue was the definition of racism, where I would always say that people can be racist, but racism is really an institutional form of oppression, and so therefore the people that are being discriminated against can't be racist. They can be bigoted, they can discriminate, but they can't be racist because they don't have the power, they don't have the control in the economy or in the country or in the politics. So white people who actually have the control here can be racist, but blacks can't be. And it took me a while to integrate that, and I remember Dr. Bush always harping on that, and it made sense after a while. When I mention that to other people, they always kind of see the light. So we can say black people, and if you're just using the term racist being defined as people who have the control in the country or in the institution or in the government, but people can be bigoted, people of any race can be discriminatory, but only the people who have control in that country or city or who own things can be racist because they're the ones that control the structure. And so that's one thing I always appreciated, that distinction. Where up until that point, I would always think anybody can be racist, but you have to look at your terms. So I suppose, I don't know, I probably didn't really answer what it was like being a white man, but I think just to look at the privilege that comes naturally, and it's a big issue around the country, like in issues like racial profiling or driving while black. You have so many people where they're stopped or something happens to them because they're black, and they would never look twice at me because I'm a white man. And I appreciate that fact that I don't have to have that hassle, but what would I have to feel like knowing that I'd be afraid to drive at certain times of the day or go through certain parts of town because I might be stopped because I would be a black person.
What was your happiest recollection in BWMT, either national or local, or maybe combined?
I don't know, I think, again, I always come back because I think of BWMT, I think of the people that I met. And that was always the happiest, getting to see them again. I think one of the saddest was losing the people, again, like I mentioned. But also one of the I think, a big letdown for me was not being reelected in '94, and that's when I kind of dropped out. And I believe it was because I brought, 2 young kids along, and I think people weren't comfortable with that. And I always felt, well, wait a minute, if we can't be an organization that can, be like a family. And I remember talking to other people, and they said, well, this is like a family reunion. And, if we can't have our families sharing this, and again, maybe they don't need to share in everything, the banquets and everything else, but still, to have people a part of that, maybe just to broaden their perspective a little bit. And so, not being reelected, I kind of looked at it as an affront, or as sort of a, I don't know what they call it in political terms. And I kind of hurt, so that's when I decided I'm just going to back off for a while. And I would still get the newsletters and everything, keep in touch, but I think by that time, our chapter in Milwaukee had kind of fallen apart. And then I remember you tried to start one up a few years later as MATC, but I think for some reason Saturday nights were bad for me. But I think I'll probably give it a crack again. But again, I still would keep in touch, and I've kind of lost touch with a lot of the people on the national level. I know who they are, and I see them once in a while, I'll chat with them here and there, but I kind of miss that because by kind of dropping out of the national scene, at least even going to conventions, I've kind of lost out on some of those friendships and missed out on people, but still keep in touch with them, through information that you provide and things like that.
I very well recollect what happened in Washington, D.C. in '94 when you didn't get elected. And I guess I would accede that you weren't elected because of people's prejudice, because you had young people who were there with you with the approval of the young boys' parents. They knew you were taking them. And I think part of it was some gay people have internalized the stereotypes of gay men preying on young children. And I think some of the people that were, say, in the education field specifically, were very much aghast that you had young, early teenage boys there with you. And unfortunately,
it's interesting that you mentioned it be from the early education, the education people.
Well, that's who it really was, because I was at that convention and I was hearing the talk, and I think it was Doug Noble and myself that approached you and let you know what the issues were, maybe even Irvin Rothenberg. I think there were three of us that felt close enough to you to let you know why.
Yeah, that's when the inklings first came. That's when I really felt, dang, I said, the thought it hadn't really crossed my mind up until that point, until you had brought it up, and I thought, wow, what's going on here? And I remember talking with Bob Williams on that too, and he says, well, heck, he says, to me, this is a reunion. He says, when I go to Florida next year, he's like, I'll bring some of my family along, to share the fun I'm going to have, Right. He says I might do that, but that was kind of a letdown, and again, maybe it wasn't the time and place. Maybe it was too soon. Maybe now would be a better time for that. But I mean, it's just that just because it's a convention, it doesn't mean that all we're going to do is constantly have sex. And I think other people need to see that. I mean, I think some gay people are still kind of isolated, where they don't really bring others into their life and let them see their aspects. I mean, these kids had no problems knowing that that there were other men around, that they were all gay.
And these boys were straight.
That I was there for a convention, and it didn't bother them. All they knew was that someone liked them, took care of them, brought them out to D.C. so they could see the city, and gave them some quality time that they'd never got, before. And but that's gone in the past. And I suppose I have to kind of, it took a while, but I think I can let that go. I can understand it with the organization. Now the last question here says, what do I think of the future of the organization? I think one thing that's great is, even though the conventions are great every year, I think maybe what they should do is, like with MCC, Metropolitan Community Churches, have the annual conventions every other year. And maybe because there's so much energy that's always focused on the convention. And there's barely, 150, 200 that attend maybe?
150, 160 has been the average the last several years. Now, this year, because they're back in San Francisco, they're expecting, I guess, 210.
But you would think that for an organization that large and for such and interracial stuff is really kind of more an in thing now these days. But maybe to focus more on, instead of having a good time for ourselves, or maybe to focus on trying to bring about some one or two major projects where we could really try to instigate some change, either on a national level, become more nationally involved with other organizations on a networking basis, or else try to focus on specific change within our cities, within our own chapters. But I think the future of the organization, if they can adhere to that, and I know that you can't force politics down people's throat, but I remember John Bush saying to someone when he was Grand Marshal in the San Francisco Parade years ago, he said, why don't you guys come on and get in the parade? It was a black and white couple. And they said, oh, not us, we're not political. And I remember he used that in a speech and says, if you are black and white and gay in this society, you are political whether you like it or not. And I always remember that statement, that black and white men together is a political statement. We are gay men, we are black men, we are white men, or Hispanic, Latino, whatever. But we are gay, and that's a political statement. And people can't see it, but once they see it, you can't shake it off. And I think the future of the organization needs to kind of address that issue more, and less in a social way, but also probably trying to bring about that change. Probably through the chapters. That's where the strength is. The national is strong through the chapters, and to maybe look at issues in which they can do that. But again, there's so much different flavors for each chapter that it's difficult to really to bring that about. If a chapter doesn't want to do it, they don't have to. But so the diversity, I think, of the organization, and I think that just the ongoing leadership, and maybe not to get so bogged down in administrative things, but really to kind of look at how they can bring about change, and by bringing people together, show that there's that need for advocacy and for that change, in our society.
I'd like to add 2 points and see if you reflect on. Here, even in Milwaukee, and I'm sure it's probably true nationally, Milwaukee has a chapter now. We've got 20 members. Most of them are interracial couples. But at Pride Fest, we saw probably 100 interracial couples, and yet they don't join BWT. We outreach, and some because they're Hispanic or Asian and white, or black with Asian. So that's part of it. They feel our name is exclusive. But even the black and white couples, we don't attract but a minority within that minority of the gay population. And number two was the aspect of the politics of just being black and white. And, that's that first aspect. And then I think BWP was at the forefront under Reggie Williams, Stephen Feebach, and a few others, Gavin Morrow Hall, on creating what was called the National Task Force for AIDS Prevention, which was the first national organization. It was founded under the auspices of NABWT that fought AIDS in the minority communities.
And it was the first, I think one of the first minority gay projects, or the first minority gay project funded by CDC back in '87.
So, do you have any recollection of either those two, or?
Well, I remember there was some contention on the board too, because at the time I was on the board, and this is when the task force wanted to separate. And I remember reading an article in the Washington Blade after the task force. They said that after the task force kind of separated from the NA is probably when things started going downhill. And I kind of had to have a little smile at that, because we didn't want to have the control, but we thought basically we're going to have some kind of control if the money comes through us. And it's almost like a kid saying, give me money, or I want to spend my money the way it is, but it's not really your money, it's money that we give you type of thing. So it was an issue of control, the NA being is the NA like more of a white organization trying to impose its will upon this black, national gay task force. But what happened is I think it became involved in personalities and politics, and basically it got caught up in more than it could handle, and it basically ended up dissolving back in I think that was 98. And the other thing you said was what, with
that there are so many more interracial couples than ever join a BWMT, a MACT, or.
And I think a lot of people, they don't have that political bent. It's like, well, we have each other, we have our circle of friends, so why do we need that organization? I mean, it's just like if you look at straight couples, all the couples that are married and have kids, do they all get involved in their schools? Do they all get involved in community groups? No. They just want to kind of live their life and not be bothered, and live out their existence. And I suppose, even though those of us of a more political nature want everyone to kind of join us, and maybe we could ask them at some point, if we get a chance, or just talking with other people, what would you like to see, or why don't you join? Not that it's good or bad that you don't, but what could we do that you think would maybe bring you on board, or was there something that that you can contribute to our organization?
Well, this has been an interview for the NABWT History Project with Michael S. Lisoswski, board member of the National Association Secretary, corresponding secretary.
From 90 to 94.
I think he had been a co-chair of the BWMT Milwaukee chapter way back when I first joined.
I think I was one of the first that was co-chair for like 2 years or something.
Right. He was on the convention planning committee when Milwaukee hosted convention in '87, and now very much an activist in gay. The program's called the Queer Program on Public Access TV. He does that, and very strong as a mentor, facilitator for Gay Youth Milwaukee, and all that we think.
And also for a lot of non-gay youth. I mean, just kids I've run into over the years that have sort of like a surrogate extended families.
And also give you credit for, I don't know how many years you've been on the board of the Pride Fest, which is the gay lesbian festival put on in Milwaukee, and I think the last 2 years you've been the co-chair there.
And and to close on that, it's like, as much as I'm into diversity and cultural diversity and bringing people on board, we haven't had that success with Pride Fest. I mean, it's a very open organization. We don't just pick and choose who we want. We try to get other people, but I think there's a lot of